Great. So good morning, everyone. It's nice to see folks this Monday morning. An agenda has been posted since late last week. I'll just share it on my screen now. And um, we have our usual sort of administrative stuff here. Um, the things we wanted to do is to give Secretary Clark a moment to introduce herself a little bit more to folks who don't know you as well. So let's take a pause and do that in just a second. Um, then the substantive things we want to do today, one is look at the agenda for next week with the council and make any last adjustments to that. Jane and folks have been making some progress and really thinking through writing responsibilities and tables of contents. We've done this a couple times, but um, Jane can explain, but she had a nice conversation with Leslie Ann about this and have some good thoughts about how to structure things, maybe even a little bit more streamlined. Um, and then finally, Just Transition Subcommittee has been meeting and thinking about how equity and just transitions play into this next phase of the work. And just have a pause and think about that. Kelly may have some specific ideas coming out of that committee. I'm not sure. Um, And finally, while this looks a little daunting to look at, there is a need to schedule up some more aggressive schedule of meetings because we have more frequent council meetings. So if you as a steering committee want to be involved in setting that and more generally getting some guidance to all of us out as we get the draft updated climate action plan out the door by late March, it's going to need quite a bit more meetings. So why don't we get those on the books? So we'll look at that and see how that is. Um, and that's it. And public comment at the end and finish up by 10, if not a little sooner. So before we get going on the agenda, any questions about what we're trying to do in this meeting today? All good? Okay, great. Well, the first thing we wanted to do was to give Secretary Clark a moment to say hi, and would love to hear also how you're seeing this process, and as you're stepping into this role also as chair of the Climate Council. Um, if you want to just say hello to folks here, I bet you know almost everyone, but just in case.
Good morning, David. Yes, I do. There are quite a few familiar names and faces, but I don't know all of you. I'm Sarah Clark. I am the Secretary of the Agency of Administration. I think I'm officially the Secretary for about 2 weeks now, 2 full weeks, though I served in an interim capacity for about 5 months beforehand. For those who don't know me, I've served in state government for almost 21 years in a variety of financial and administrative roles, um, including as the CFO of the Agency of Human Services, as the Deputy Fiscal Officer for the Joint Fiscal Office, and as the Deputy Commissioner of Finance and Management, along with a smattering of other places. So while I don't bring expertise in climate change, I have made a career in state administrative and financial processes. And I understand that that's something that I hope to contribute to the steering committee and the Climate Council. It is a new area for me, and so I hope to get up to speed quickly, and we'll look to some of you to help guide me as we move forward. Excited to be part of this group because I understand we have a busy 6 months ahead of us.
Indeed, we do. Thanks, Secretary Clark. So, and indeed, it'll be as you're stepping into this role as chair of the council, we can talk about how that can be most fluid and work best. There's been some sort of pinch hitting by me as the facilitator in the absence of a chair. And so I think that'll be a good conversation for us to have. Okay, great. Any questions for Secretary Clark before we get going?
Hey, David, it's Jane.
Hey, Jane.
I might just suggest that since there's various people on camera, just the steering committee members acknowledge who they are for Secretary Clark and introduce
Oh, yeah.
themselves. I'm not sure if I'm not sure who Secretary Clark knows or doesn't.
Great point. So steering committee members on this call include Bram and Liz and Jared and Kelly Klein and Secretary Moore. Um, and well, Matt, you're on the council. You're not actually on the steering committee, just FYI, just for Sarah Clark's um, knowledge. I think that's it. So yeah, unless I'm missing someone. Thanks, Jane, for that. And if folks want to say hi, you're welcome to, particularly if you can't get on camera right now.
Well, I did receive that Bram is, I think, moving on to be a legislator. So congratulations to you, Bram. I saw that email this morning.
Thank you very much. Yes, and I did send an email to the other House nominated members of the Climate Council, letting them know that once again, Liz is our steadfast member, and the seat I'm in seems to be the rotating House seat. So letting people know that was available and asking them to reach out to Jane and Secretary Clark if they were interested.
Excellent. All right. Yeah, new chapter, Bram. That's fantastic. Okay. All right, so let's dive into the items we wanted to get to today, if that's all right. The first one is we didn't approve minutes. Let's do that for a sec. Minutes are linked into the document. I'll just give everyone a moment if you haven't looked at them to click through. Let me just give folks a moment. If stuff hasn't been put in the chat yet, I can do that right now. Yeah. Should be our agenda. Does anybody need an extra moment with the minutes? No? Any concerns about the minutes?
Minutes look good, thank you.
Thanks, Jared. Last call. Any more time? Okay. Without any concerns, we'll treat those as approved. Thanks, everyone. Okay, great. Now, into the council agenda, also linked into the agenda. I will just pull this up on the screen though, because I think it'd be helpful to look at this. We talked about this last time. I took in the feedback from our last call and made this version of the agenda. And let's see if it's hitting the mark for what you wanted. I made sort of a longer spiel at the top of this because each little item doesn't have much in there. And you can see what it says here. But essentially, we're framing this as an opportunity to receive a briefing on the priority recommendations from the 3 subcommittees and the 3 cross-cutting groups. So we're going to try to do all 6 things together. And that means it's going to be fairly high level. It's not going to be a detailed walk through all strategies and actions. It's going to be a sort of quick over the waterfront, kind of looking at the full range of stuff from a pathway standpoint, and then trying to get into those priority actions that each of the subcommittees is wrestling with right now. So here I say presenters will be coached to keep presentations to roughly 12 minutes. So that's going to be my job to try to help subcommittee co-chairs and others who are presenting. It's really tough, right? Because each of those subcommittees has multiple task groups with multiple things. So it's a lot of content. So I recognize the stretch of it, but I feel like if we don't put a little bit of a sort of required high-level approach to this, we won't get through the content and have that full briefing from all these recommendations. And I just note that this meeting marks a handoff to the full council from subcommittees, particularly the substantive subcommittees. And this is an opportunity to sort of, as a council, to soak this in, to ask some clarifying questions, and even start to flag some things that you think are going to be needed, where we'll need some real attention in January, February, and into March. So that's before I go on to the order of how to do the 6 things. I just want to settle on this, and I see Jared, you have your hand up, so go ahead, please.
Thanks, David. I like this note, and I think it provides helpful context up front. There's just one piece of it that I would suggest a slight revision to,
Yeah.
and just to test whether we're all on the same page. I think for that second paragraph, to my mind, it would make more sense to say the meeting marks the initial handoff to the full council, or an initial handoff. And the reason I say that is that I think at least the subcommittees that I'm involved in, I think, are anticipating feedback from the council and then to continue work on the recommendations, and that there are recommendations that are not fully developed, especially, that they intend to keep working on. And so I anticipate a little bit of a back and forth where initial recommendations will be elevated from the subcommittee for council deliberation. But to me, the framing of a handoff seems as though all of the work would then shift from the subcommittees to the council. And I think in the next few months, it's going to be a bit more of a back and forth where the subcommittees will still have a role in revising and development of recommendations. So just wanted to offer that.
Thanks, Jared. It's a great point. And I think it is important to lay out our visions on that. And maybe we do have somewhat different visions for those 3, particularly the 3 substantive subcommittees. I think science and data is a different thing, right? But the 3 substantive
cross-sector.
Yeah. And cross-sector is interesting, right? Because we're waiting on the Cap and Invest study, we're waiting on the modeling and things like that. And cross-sector could be helpful in the interpreting of that, right? Okay. I'm curious what others feel about that. Jane, you had your hand up. Oh, sorry, Bram.
No, hands first.
Yeah. Jane had a hand up. I don't know if it was on this same issue, and I saw Secretary Moore's hand go up as well.
Yeah, I have a different comment, so please let the steering committee members comment.
Thanks. Julie?
Yeah, I just want to flag that we've got to be careful about making sure we are all on the same page and having clarity about when that final handoff occurs. It's going to have real impacts on the draft we are able to take out to the public for comment and review. And I do worry that sort of leaving it open-ended, appreciating there may be pieces where we need to solicit additional input or feedback from the substantive steering committees, but I don't want to leave folks with the impression that there should be a lot of additional work happening. I think after that handoff occurs, it's more fine-tuning and responding to questions, to my mind. And this is really the place where the council has to lead and sort of take over the process in order to deliver a report consistent with the statutory timelines.
Graham?
I think Secretary Moore's point is very well taken. And I just wonder, at some point there needs to be a final handoff to the full council. And I wonder if, I don't recall identifying this meeting's date as the date at which that happened. In fact, I don't actually recall a discussion of when the full handoff has to happen. But also, to Jared's point, I think there probably will be some period starting on the 16th where it will mark, I would say, the engagement of the full council in the work of each of the subcommittees, leading to a final handoff to the council on X date. But I agree with Secretary Moore. We need a hard date for that final handoff.
Other thoughts on this, or how to phrase this? Because I think this is really important, and it's really important for messaging. I think cross-sector is the only subcommittee that would, where there's a substantive thing around the modeling and around the cap and invest study that's coming in late, right? It's coming in February-ish. Other subcommittees don't have something similar like that. Jared?
I think it might be helpful to pause and talk about what we mean by handoff. I'm also thinking in my mind about the process last time and what worked well and what could have been improved on. And if by handoff we mean the recommendations as they stand now being shared with and receiving feedback and getting engagement of the full council, that makes sense to me. If by handoff we mean no more work happens in the subcommittees and all of the kind of revision and deliberation work is happening just by the council, I think that's problematic because we have a number of subject matter experts who've been devoting countless hours to the background research that goes into these recommendations. Some of them on cross-sector, including on transportation, because there's outstanding studies, are not fully drafted. And others will likely benefit from additional deliberation between the subcommittees and the council in the coming months. So if we just mean this is the first time that the council's seeing the priority recommendations of the subcommittees and initially reacting to them, that's fine with me. If we mean that subcommittee work is stopping and additional work on these recommendations only happens in full council meetings, I think that that would be problematic in terms of efficiency and in terms of subject matter expertise to kind of fully finalize a number of these recommendations. Of course, with the direction, with the approval of the council, just given the amount of work that's still ahead of us, I wouldn't want to send a signal that the subcommittees are kind of now done with their work.
Okay. To be clear, when I wrote it, I was trying to send that signal. That was the signal I was trying to send of subcommittees are largely done with their work. There's a caveat there around cross-sector in the studies. But so I think if that's not the signal you want to send, Jared, let's figure out in the steering committee what it is you want to send as a signal. Bram?
So I think we do want to send that signal, and I think there is a date at which the subcommittees stop making changes to this document and to their recommendations. I think that the ambiguity that we are discussing now is what is that date? And is it December 16th, or does it happen mid-April when the subcommittees are done? And from there on out, it's full council. So as I said earlier, I agree with Secretary Moore, we need to choose a date. I don't have a very clear sense of the best point for that to happen. At which point the committees will have had time to substantially finish all of their work. Late enough so that happens, but early enough so the full council has time to take over and make all the final changes the full council wants to make, along with how that interacts with the public engagement schedule. So I both don't have a clear sense of the proper date and acknowledge that I will no longer be part of the council when that date comes. So I will end my comments here.
Thanks, Bram. Secretary Moore?
Yeah, maybe it'd be helpful, David, if you or Jane could walk us through sort of the planned public engagement, and then we can work back from that to pick the type of date Bram was referring to. I agree. I don't think it helps to leave it open-ended at this point.
Okay. I'd happily do that. And maybe Liz, why don't you chime in and then Jane or I could walk through sort of timelines and what we're thinking.
Yeah, I had a similar question. I had thought that, and maybe this is just to reconcile what Secretary Moore was saying, but I had thought that we had a routine process of discussing things twice, essentially. And so in my head, this was the first time the full council would be hearing things, probably offering some comment and reaction that I expected would go back to the subcommittee one more time, as it were. I don't remember when our next climate council meeting is, but at least for cross sector, that will feel like the right order. So at any rate, I'm not sure if there's a really big disagreement here, or disconnect rather, or instead we just make it clear that, yep, this is the first time you're hearing this. And just like usual, you'll have a chance to react and provide feedback, and we'll expect the subcommittees to do any tweaks that might be necessary and further work in some cases. And then we'll be coming together next time, at which point I would think the schedule would be such that we'd be in 2025 and heading to council draft and public feedback.
Thanks, Liz. Jane, do you want to walk
Record,
through?
I was going to say we have the next climate council meeting is January 27th, and the one after that is February 10th, according to the calendar.
And there actually is one snuck in the middle there on the 13th of January as well.
That's what I thought. I was like, yeah, I think we decided there would be 2 in January.
Yeah, because we want to have time to go through content and things.
Yeah.
Jane, do you want to walk through sort of how you're seeing the timeline, and then how we could adjust this language on the screen to meet that?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, just in response to Secretary Moore's comment and Jared and others about public engagement, we don't have any public, like specific public engagement anticipated until the draft comes together. So we've put together a schedule that looks at a complete draft being done by the end of March. And then largely the council's work shifts to engagement. There are no council meetings scheduled for the month of April, which is when we have additional capacity actually through grant to RPCs to help us plan on the ground in-person meetings up to 8 that we can do around the state. And RPCs will actually add in some capacity for us in helping us schedule locations, take notes, support CBI in that work. Although I anticipate and know that CBI has built into their contract also joining us in Vermont to help facilitate those meetings in person. So we have 6 to 8 on the ground, and likely we'll do some version online as well. So I think that I'm very much intrigued by the conversation. I think I'd be curious for counselors who sit on different subcommittees, or Billy or others who are on this meeting, to speak about different subcommittees. And I very much appreciate Liz and Jared's comments about cross-sector with the modeling and the CAP study still underway, and would just put it back to the steering committee if that feels unique to that subcommittee, or how much interactive work there really will be needed from the other subcommittees going forwards. Because I do think Ag and Eco and Rural Resilience are planning for a discrete sort of handoff in December. And that might be okay for those subcommittees, and they might take a different path than cross-sector. So that's probably to discuss, but there likely needs to be back and forth with cross-sector after December.
Yeah. I see Billy Coster's on the call, Andrea Wright's on the call. I wonder if, feel free to chime in about the realities of those two subcommittees if you're able to join.
Thanks, David. I think Jane's assessment is accurate. I think based on the previously published guidance, we've been working under the assumption that there'd be a fairly clean handoff in December. If you look at the key milestones in the process section of that guidance, it says January through March, council consolidates subcommittee input into a single document, approves versions. Subcommittees don't have tasks in this period unless the climate asks for help. The council asks for help. So we're not envisioning a role for us, unless there's some very discrete technical question after this handoff in December. Thanks.
Great. Okay. And Andrea's here, but looks like she's on her phone, so it may be hard to join in from a rural resilience standpoint. But I don't know, Liz or others Liz Amler and others who are paying attention to rural resilience process if they may be in a similar situation as what Billy described.
I'm just not sure when they're planning for the exact handoff. So
Sorry, I couldn't hear that very clearly,
I'm
Liz.
not sure when they're planning for the exact handoff, so I can't.
Okay. I wonder not to belabor this point, but it sounds like particularly for cross-sector, it's important to give the signal that there will be some back and forth and there's things to do. One way to solve this marks a handoff instead of the handoff, a handoff to the full council and subcommittees where the council will likely ask, may ask subcommittees for additional input and blah, blah, blah. So you could add a sentence there that mirrors sort of what Billy read out of the guidance document. If that is sufficient to get the right signals out there. So Jared and others who brought this up, if we made this like marks a handoff to the full council, the council may ask subcommittees for additional input over the coming months, that kind of thing. That work? Liz says yes, Jared says yes. Okay. All right. So why don't we do that and we can align it with the sort of guidance that we've done, which is always a helpful thing to do. And thank you for flagging that, Jared. I really appreciate that. And it was a helpful conversation for us to have. Okay, so moving on, if we can fix this blurb. Thanks for that improvement. This is the way we ordered. Oh, sorry, Jane, did you want to jump in? Oh, you had a separate issue, didn't you?
Yeah, I have my separate issue that I wanted to bring up and then a comment on cross-cutting, so it can be a bridge. I just thought I would acknowledge that there were significant concerns raised at the last climate council meeting about the substance of material being handed off to counselors with not enough time and sort of that feeling of like, a burden to review things. I don't think this is going to be much different in all honesty, because subcommittees are meeting right up until the end of this week and really working hard to sort of transition up. And the focus of the presentations that we've given subcommittees as drafts to fill in are really focused on just the priority actions and not on that full suite of all the actions they're considering. So I guess I'm just sort of flagging for Liz and I and seeing if this works for steering committee members. I think an email to the council this week acknowledging that we heard them at the last meeting, that things are coming to them in like a lot of substance to review. But if they could even schedule some time on Friday just to hold an hour to sort of look at the full package of actions, knowing that it's going to come then, that it would be helpful planning rather than just dropping it on Friday with them. So I just wanted to acknowledge that we can do that so people don't feel quite so burdened by receiving information, understanding that we want to do better in getting it to them sooner and can strive for that as the year moves on. Julie has her hand up, so if she wants to respond to that, happy to hear that. And then I have one more comment on cross-cutting issues.
I was just going to reflect that I'm participating in another large process right now, and they actually book reading time on our calendars immediately prior to the meeting with the thought, and it so far has been effective that people aren't necessarily going to be able to carve time to read on their own. And so having dedicated time on your calendar, like they effectively convened the meeting, we did introductions, and then it went cameras dark for, well, in this instance, half an hour so folks could actually read stuff. It's a little different, David, than I think the process you've used the last few meetings provides more time, frankly. But by convening the meeting, it does just what that does in our case, encourages people to show up and then provide a somewhat longer block of time for folks to actually engage with the material.
Thanks, Julie. Nice idea. Okay, so just before you pivot to the next point, Jane, there could obviously be an email out to the council saying what's going to happen, when the material is going to drop. Let's look at the calendar, the agenda for this meeting, and whether a reading time is good or actually isn't really needed because we're not going deep this time. Let's see, right? But in the future, I really like, Secretary Moore, what you're saying is like actual beefy reading time that allows you to read maybe a half hour or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Nice.
I suggested it largely because to see the priority actions without knowing the full body of work feels like an awkward space to me, because that's, counselors are gonna see the priorities, but they're not gonna know what they were lifted up from. So just, I think just even having a full breadth of the body of work would be helpful. So, and they're not diverging much from the last climate action plan, except for a few new areas. So at least if folks are steeped in the initial plan, they'll have that context.
Great. Okay.
And my second comment, just in thinking about time, and Liz is next to me, I think of cross-cutting issues and recommendations as a book of work that is enabling of all of the climate action plan specific sections. And so while I know there are different topic areas, I like it as one agenda item. So I just wanted to put this out there. I'm sorry I didn't catch this in reviewing the agenda, but wasn't sure if they really needed 3 like separate chunks of time like this. And if you just did one 20-minute presentation and did it together, then had some time for discussion about it, it could free up some time, and you could see it as, because you want to think about it, are these the 3 most important issues to be elevating as cross-cutting issues? What do they look like comprehensively? And then, tell the story that way. So I just thought it might be, rather than separate, to actually put it all together. It might help with efficiency.
I saw Jared with a thumbs up on that idea. Do others feel good about that? Yeah, I see a lot of nodding heads. Okay, great. So we will tighten that up, and that could actually give us more time for the subcommittees after the break, and we could stretch out the agenda a little bit on those other ones. Okay, great. So that is a nice pivot, Jane. Thank you, into the structure of the agenda. So we could combine this into a single thing, do a single 15-20-minute presentation on education, land use, and workforce, have a conversation about it, some public comment, and a break, maybe a little earlier. We pick up 20 minutes or something, or half hour by doing that, or maybe more. I don't know. I haven't done the math. And then after the break, we have the 3 substantive ones. I guess maybe we can even do one before a break. Let me see how the timing works out. And here we had scheduled, what is that? 25 minutes each. And so if we could schedule, say, 40 minutes each, that seems a little bit better, right? There's no magic to this order. I had given a little bit more time to cross-sector just because the breadth of those recommendations, and probably would continue to do that. So I'm curious if there's any thoughts about this. Jared?
Thanks, David. Again, with the caveat that my perspective is primarily from participating in cross-sector, and I don't have eyes on and can't speak to ag and ecosystems and rural resilience. But my sense is that it would take about this full time to do a thorough substantive presentation of the recommendations. And so what I'm wondering if is missing, and I think is really important, is a time for counselors who aren't on the subcommittees that are lifting up those priority recommendations to ask questions and provide feedback. Maybe it's intended that kind of like questions and discussion would be within those sections, but as it is now, it doesn't feel like there's much time for that. And so I wonder if it's worth, if we do extend those, maybe we keep these kind of overviews and presentations to 20-25 minutes, but then build in time for questions and discussion, so that the only feedback isn't just public comment, but it's from other counselors who aren't on those subcommittees.
Yeah. Jared, I had put out there the idea of presentations that are quite a bit tighter. They're in the sort of the 12-minute mark.
I just think, I mean, we ran into the challenge when we were presenting them last time that there was just key detail that couldn't be gotten to in that time frame, and then there was confusion around what the recommendation actually was. Again, this may be different, as you said. It may differ by subcommittee, but I just want to I totally hear you and agree with you, David, that these need to be short and tight, and well organized and well prepared. I just want to make sure that there's enough time to get around across the basic information so that we do arrive at shared understanding, and then there is time for people to share questions and engage in conversation as desired.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I wonder if maybe it's just part of that is explicitly noting that on the agenda, time for questions and discussion amongst the whole council, not just presentation from those subcommittees.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the idea here is to have space for discussion, right? That is a priority, to do that. I was just trying to find for instance, when Buildings and Thermal did a presentation the other day in the cross-sector meeting, that's the presentation we're imagining, but consolidated for each subcommittee. If somebody has that handy, we could just look at that together because that's sort of the altitude we're looking for. Oops, hang on a second. I'm going to stop sharing for one moment so I don't mess things up. Does somebody have that handy, that presentation that, who gave that for Buildings and Thermal? Maybe Liz has it. But in any case,
Dave Farnsworth presented it to start, but then there were other
yeah,
too.
yeah. But one of the things that does is it allows you to walk across it sort of like a pathway level, and not get pulled into the detail, and then hit your priority actions. And then so you can spend most of your time on the priority actions. I mean, the challenge, Jared, I see is like each subcommittee could do a 45-minute presentation about sort of the context of the work and this and that, and that would be wonderful, but it's too much, right? It's a dilemma. I'm not quite sure how to deal with that. Do others have some opinion about this? No? All right. Well, how about this? What if we crunch up the cross-cutting piece into a single unit? It allows some efficiencies in time. We distribute that time into the subcommittee presentations, so they go from being, say, 25 minutes to something like 40 minutes. And we give a signal that we're really not looking for more than 15 minutes of presentation from the subcommittees, and that leaves, 20 minutes or so of discussion for counselors who haven't been involved in the work to ask questions, to everybody feel comfortable what's being presented. Does that seem like a plan? Okay. Great. And that PowerPoint, actually, Liz, you sent it out as a template the other day. It's the problem having so many
You want to
emails.
fill out the priorities with? Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
I don't even know if you could share your screen with it if you have it handy, but I just think having everybody here, the steering committee, take a quick peek at that as to like, this is what we're asking for.
David, just since we're off mute, I'll just acknowledge, I do, Jared's comments are resonating with me largely because I think that if they just say a top action, for instance, from Buildings Thermal is to initiate a rulemaking around, like emission appliance standards, most people on the council wouldn't really know what that is, what that means, like, what is there an impact? I think the recommendations of cross-sector just inherently are more technical and complicated. They require a base level of knowledge that maybe isn't as innate in most folks. So,
Yeah.
So it's just going to be challenging to get at that level and explain something quickly enough that people can grasp it, but then know where to send them for more information, and just remind people that there is a number of months ahead of us to really take in that information and understand the recommendation.
Yeah, I agree. It's complicated stuff, and it feels so difficult to do this kind of summary work in that. Liz, I found it. And so the idea here, if folks haven't seen this, is for each subcommittee, you walk across the pathways as a way of looking across the full range of the types of things doing. But instead of listing your strategies and actions, you just say, hey, we've got 3 strategies under this and 7 actions or something that address this. So this is for the things that are overall, and you run that until you have, and then you have a couple slides where you're really leaning into the priorities, the priority actions that the subcommittees identified. And so this is where you can provide the level of detail you think is necessary within, say, a 15-minute window to explain these priority actions. And there'll be, up to 15 of them, right? Because that's what we said from each subcommittee is. Some subcommittees are probably might be do a little less, but which is great. So this is the template. I just want to check in with folks. Jared?
Thanks, David. Yeah, I appreciate, Jane, what you said, and I agree with that because one of my reflections after that presentation was that it was actually too short because it was clear to me that without providing the detail in the nuance about the recommendation, for instance, around equipment performance standards, it was immediately misunderstood or understood as something that actually wasn't being proposed. And so I do think it's worth taking the time to look at the actual text of the recommendation, not just a high-level summary of it, because there's important nuance on phasing of the timeline around exemptions, around different types of equipment in different sectors, and all of that detail, which is important for public understanding, got lost when we were asked to shorten it to just a high level summary. So what you said is resonating with me, Jane, and I do think there are some recommendations that benefit from real clarity and pausing to note the important details and nuance.
Yeah. Secretary Moore?
Yeah, I think we've got to be careful on kind of what the role of the Climate Council is in this space, in terms of if it's identifying policy needs or engaging in specifics. And to me, specifics sit with the agencies of state government. I think, to the extent there's context around what is included in an appliance standard and making sure folks are comfortable or understand the assumptions that framed it in terms of how it plugged into the pathways modeling or other tools that are being used to evaluate its impact. That's all really important for the Climate Council. But some of the details you're describing, Jared, I feel like come up in the rulemaking process and would be subject to public comment at that point. And I don't think we want to be prescribing at that level of detail in the climate action plan. Frankly, regarding any recommendations the council may move forward, and that it becomes then really challenging for the agencies who are going to have to look at statutory authorities and other pieces to actually consider how this work would get done. I worry about having that kind of level of detail, both in terms of being able to gain the council's understanding on the time we have available, and then what it means functionally in terms of our ability to act.
That sounds like something that cross-sector would need to deal with this week as it meets, right? And sort of how to take in that input. And maybe there can be, I'm just hesitant about getting too deep into this conversation right now in the context of trying to sort out the agenda for Monday. But I hear you loud and clear, Secretary Moore, that that's an issue for you. Okay. Could I say, like, that seems like an important thing to bring, an important viewpoint to bring into the cross-sector conversation on Thursday when the cross-sector finishes up its work and for the Monday meeting? Okay. In terms of the Monday meeting, though, what I'm hearing is if we add more time in, let's definitely leave some time for presentations, and then subcommittees can use their own criteria, which of their priority actions need additional explanation time and which are pretty more self-explanatory, and that you should have the flexibility to do that. So if you need to sit and talk for a moment about a particular recommendation, that's fine, right? It's just, it would be a shame to use up the majority of the time on presentation, so that there isn't time for discussion and questions and all that kind of stuff. So aim for a 15-minute presentation, um, would be my recommendation. Does that sound good? Any final things on this agenda? Anybody have any preferences about order of subcommittees? Anything, any other input on the agenda? Okay. Great, thank you. The next thing we want to talk about, and we are a little behind, I will admit to that. Apologies, folks. Jane, you had wanted to talk about the updated table of contents in a conversation you had with Leslie Ann and some other things. Can I just turn it over to you and have you describe what you want to talk about with the steering committee?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this sort of builds on the conversation about the December meeting and what it is and isn't as far as a handoff to the Climate Council. But I had the fortunate opportunity to sit down and spend an hour with Leslie Ann. Liz and I did to talk. She wanted to talk to us specifically about how her section with respect to the role that she's playing in drafting the section through science and data fits into the climate action plan. And as a result, we sort of spent the hour sort of diving deep into what we had been proposing as a table of contents and really trying to think about the flow of the climate action plan this time around, as well as David alluded to at the beginning of the meeting, where things can really be pushed out of the plan into an appendix or a table, really trying to make the plan more readable, because as you all know, the first plan is quite long. It wasn't formatted quite well. It was sort of a rush to the finish line, and we're hoping we can do better this time. So that's what the thought process was with Leslie Ann. As we walk through this, though, what I also wanted to acknowledge is in the previous iteration of this document, we had the lead author acknowledged as a subcommittee member or a subcommittee rep. And in this document, while perhaps a counselor might lean on others to support them, we really wanted to acknowledge that the drafting of the climate action plan, wherever there is substance, especially recommendations, that lives with the council. And we tried to think about putting in respective titles around which counselor would take a lead role based on the content and what subcommittee they actually are a representative on. So what you'll see on this document now is the Climate Action Office staff providing some high-level support with respect to anything that is not recommendation or substantive in nature, where there are just components that we can help pull together for you all, we can do that. If I've misrepresented some of that sections here, I look forward to hearing from all of you where we can fine tune that. And then I put the most appropriate counselors that I thought made sense, but wanted to note that where they're italicized, I have not, or Liz and I have not directly connected with them to ensure this responsibility is something they can take on. So those are just placeholders right now for us to do some outreach to finalize this document in the next few weeks. So you'll note also that I put the steering committee in a number of places, just thinking that from a process or component of the drafting that you all felt like logical place to turn for that, but also happy to have pushback on that as well. So we also, with respect to the date, put the dates for anything that we wanted to have in the complete draft for the March timeline, and then looked further out into May and June for things that we didn't feel like like the executive summary, for instance, are capable of being drafted till we have a final document, or things that really need the public engagement section as well to like see through the spring. So we tried to get as much as we could for the comprehensive draft, acknowledging that some things just can't be ready by March. So let me just walk through this quickly and then I'm happy to turn it over to questions. You'll notice that through a thought process with Leslie Ann, we really did think that public engagement and Vermonters' voices should be lifted right up to the first substantive chapter of the climate action plan. So everything we get to, the letter from the council, the land acknowledgement, which we'll do again this spring, the executive summary and acknowledgements feel like just precursors to the actual plan. And the first substantive chapter is the public engagement chapter. Sophie, through her role in our office in managing the public engagement and working with the CBI team, will certainly be a lead in helping to pull together that information. But we felt like Just Transitions obviously was the place that as a subcommittee was managing that, and would look to Kelly or Denise as the counselors on that to help set the tone for what we got right this time, what we fell short on, and the overall sentiment of what we're hearing from public engagement. Leslie Ann, as will take the lead on updating the chapter around climate and climate change in Vermont. So you'll note this change in title that reflects her interest in speaking to both the impacts of climate change, what we're seeing from a scientific perspective as changing around her role with the National Climate Assessment, but then also really wants to make it quite a human component, which is around the climate change in Vermont and how those impacts are being felt. That'll transition to this new chapter around health that Leslie Ann is also supporting and thinking about. It was included in the climate change section that she wrote last time, but because we have Dr. Levine on the council now and a detailed focus on that through rural resilience, we're lifting that up through to a new chapter on its own. David Grass, while not a counselor, is representing Dr. Levine on rural resilience. And as we thought about this, he's our already articulated interest in serving a lead role in this space in writing this chapter, and has been coordinating closely with Leslie Ann to think about how those two chapters work together. I forgot I was waiting for someone else to scroll, sorry. Okay, so the equity into the cap, that's really our Just Transitions. We'll talk about how that's represented this time as a chapter. I know Denise and Kelly, through the role of Just Transitions, are already talking about that chapter and drafting, and there's an outline that Just Transitions has already been working on. The next section is the only other time you'll see a non-counselor. And Jared, I just want to flag this because this is the chapter that was in the initial cap. It's been revamped to think about the climate economy and include resilience and other opportunities outside of just the energy space. In science and data, Ken Jones, as a subcommittee rep, took this on as a responsibility. I still have him listed here, but might want to list you, Jared, technically as the counselor rep, or Julie or Leslie Ann, others who are on science and data, knowing
I've
that
agreed to work with him on
will
that.
largely come from Ken. Yeah. The next chapter is really that progress assessment that transitions from like the work of the first cap to the new recommendations. We'll need a counselor to write and set that stage, because I imagine that will be different perspectives on how much progress we've made and how much more action is needed. I will support you in creating a table that focuses on the actions that progress report we delivered to the council last January, but the narrative of that really will have to come from a counselor. The top priority action.
Jane, I just offer, I'm happy to help with that.
That would be great. I can put you in for there. Anybody else wants to jump in and volunteer like Julie? That sounds great. But I'll just keep flowing. So the priority actions, this will be the, I want to just say, this will be the only place that we're thinking about in the body of the plan that you'll actually see a table that has recommendations. So I just want to pause on that, and we'll want you to reflect on that as a steering committee. The plan last time was almost 300 pages, and that was largely because of the way we carried every recommendation, every pathway, strategy, and action into the plan. What we're thinking about for this plan and putting out there and for you all to consider is that we would have the top 30 actions or whatever that number is that we get to with all of you over the next few months. That would be a table, and that would be called out as sort of the priority work that needs to be done. These other chapters for all the other sections would be just that: narratives, chapters, discussions. And then in the back of the plan, we would have a nicely formatted table that really has all of the actions that are coming out that weren't the highest priority, top priorities, but that would be in the back of the plan that would really have everything there. So, and the way we've been thinking about formatting is that that would still be a separate, easily printable document where you could walk away and hold all 250 recommendations in one place, but that the body of the plan, to streamline it, would just have those priority actions and then more of a narrative discussion about all the other chapters. So I'll just keep going because we're almost done, and then you guys can discuss that. The rest of the sections of the plans, I think are pretty explanatory about who the counselors are that I put in front of each chapter. And then just note that the scientific underpinning of the plan, that used to be a chapter up front. But that, Jared, it really, I have you there, but that because I believe you already acknowledged responsibility for helping with that. But that's really the scientific work that is related to the mitigation pathways and nothing else. So we thought it made more sense to put it under the mitigation section of the plan, acknowledging that there isn't scientific work really happening to foster the recommendations and the resilience and other spaces.
Yeah, that was a relatively short section the first time.
Yes.
It was like I think a 3-page overview of the council's decision on the social cost of greenhouse gases, which has since been updated. And I would have to look to see the second section, but that initially makes sense to me.
Great. And I think it would have we'd probably have the business as usual model and some of the projections discussed in there and things like that. Okay, and then the rest of the chapters, the coordination of the CAP with other state plans and initiatives, I'm offering to write that. This last time it was a section that was mostly focused on the CEP, but this time we've expanded it to think about how we will involve the SHMP, the State Hazard Mitigation Plan, the Resilience Implementation Strategy in this section. So since it's largely the CAP with state plans and initiatives, it made sense that the state could offer to write that section. The Climate Council next steps, that's just sort of the end of the plan, what the work is carrying forward. Legislative action and rulemaking, that would just simply be a table where we make sure all the rules that are considerations for legislative action are called out in one place. Beyond, I think that actually is the next chapter is sort of a carryover. The CAP action tables, it should be linked with the one above. And everything else is really connect with the council. That can be a call out box, not a chapter anymore. Our office is working right now to think about how we pull in some personal stories and support that, so we can link directly like a top priority recommendation with a personal story or a municipality story for the CAP to give it more of a human element. And the rest of the stuff is CAO stuff that we'll pull together on behalf of the plan development, which is pretty self-explanatory. My goal, I'm just going to say it, is that the plan is going to be under 100 pages. That's our marching order in my mind. It feels like a readable, usable plan if it's 100 pages or less.
Including that table?
No, appendices don't count.
Okay. Yeah. Jared?
I have a question about, and maybe we don't need to go into it now, but I just want to flag it for now about the connect with the council call out box. And the reason I'm wondering about that is that I feel like the subcommittees and the council have done a lot of public engagement in the lead up to the climate action plan. But if this is the published plan, then the kind of arena for deliberation will be more in public hearings for rulemaking and in the legislative process. And so I just wouldn't want to send a signal, and many of the counselors' terms will end before the next cap. And so if we're looking at the climate action plan as primarily, our biggest responsibility where we make recommendations, I mean, I think that I imagine many other counselors would be happy to hear input and feedback, but in terms of the kind of tangible opportunity to incorporate that, the plan will be done. There are sometimes extenuating circumstances when things that we didn't anticipate happen and we need to revise a recommendation or do an addendum to the plan, but we've agreed that we want to try to minimize that and do that only as necessary. And so I guess I just have a question about what that would look like, given that the most important time, I think, to connect with the council is in advance of the plan and the drafting of the plan. And then once it's published, it's not really clear to me what that looks like unless there is a proposed revision or addendum or until the next cap in 2029.
Yeah, I think those are all fair points, and I think we can say something to that effect, but similar to last time, I imagine the council will still meet quarterly, discuss budget up recommendations as interested at the end of the year, different things like that. So I think we can acknowledge the website, the ongoing engagement that our office is doing, the slowing down, but still availability through public meetings, and then obviously the handoff to the legislature, the administration, and looking and signaling that that is a space to work with us.
Great. I'm particularly interested in folks digesting the big, what I sense, Jane, is the big change here, which is in the body of the plan, focusing on the priority recommendations, the priority actions, and then some narratives on each of the substantive areas. But the actual pathway strategies and actions end up in a table in an annex. Like that's the big move that I sense that you and Leslie Ann talked about. So I just want to check with steering committee members. Does that sound good to folks? A way to streamline? Any feedback for Jane and everybody on that? Okay. And the other big thing that I understood, Jane, is really trying to say who is the counselor or counselors most, responsible for taking the lead, and that's going to be someone from the particular subcommittee, but the counselor on that subcommittee or counselors who really would step up and have a lead role in the drafting. Is that right, Jane?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Both two great points.
Any feedback on that? Okay. Super. And just quickly, Jane, when you think about the sort of narrative piece that goes in the body of the plan, like how big are you thinking for those narrative pieces? Are you thinking like a page and a half of narrative or something like that? Or what are you thinking?
I haven't thought about it in great detail, but every one of those chapters in the first cap had a narrative that sort of set the stage for the then pathway strategies actions, and they were not that long. They were, I'm going to grossly overestimate or simplify, but they were like 3 or 4 pages long each.
Yeah.
So I would imagine nothing more than that. And hopefully through the table, there's also work that could be done to reference the broader suite of actions. But I think what it would help us do is tell a compelling story of the body of work that needs to be done rather than focus on explaining every recommendation, which gets kind of lost. The overall arc of the work gets lost as a result.
Okay, great. I'm not hearing a ton of reaction here, so I assume that's because folks are comfortable. Is that what's going on? Liz?
Yeah, no, I'm comfortable. The lack of reactions, just I think it's going to get refined as it goes along. I mean, I could make comments about sections that I think could be reordered, but until we get further along, I think this is a really good outline to make sure all the pieces are together.
Super. Thanks, Liz. Okay. Great. All right. Jane, did you need anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay. All right. Kelly, are you in a position to help with this next thing?
Yes. Apologies for keeping my camera off still, but yes. Um so sorry, my son is running around. I was trying to look up our meeting notes, which I haven't gotten yet, but at our meeting last Thursday of the Just Transition Subcommittee, we were talking about ways that we might be able to help support the subcommittees more in their equity work. Since we have liaisons on the different subcommittees, a theme that we heard was just feeling that we could be doing more. And one of a couple different suggestions came up, one being just, hey, we could help review some of this for plain language, maybe also help with drafting like a small plain language summary, that like if there's some key stuff that in there that's a little bit technical and hard to digest if you're not up on all that info and all the terminology, having us help draft a plain language summary of that could be sort of like in a call out box in chapters that are drafted by their subcommittees. So that was one, and then just other okay, here's so let me just see if I'm missing anything. Apologies. I'll be right back.
No worries, no worries. So I think the overall piece of this is saying, particularly as we transition more to council work, like how does Just Transitions provide support and the expertise to maintain this lens and this view of equity and just transition in this process? So as Kelly gets organized there, I think that was the question. And I'd be interested, steering committee members, if you have some thoughts on this about the kind of support, how the council might lean on just transitions over the next few months as it's finalizing, consolidating, finalizing the work. So just put that as an open-ended question as Kelly gets back on. Graham?
I think the Just Transition Subcommittee is a resource for all the subcommittees who are putting together priorities and plans and actions to ensure that the plan provides more than proportional share of benefits to marginalized communities and burdens them with less than proportional share of the costs. And I think, sort of, it is the job of every subcommittee to ensure that the plan furthers social justice in that way. And I think, we will want the Just Transition Subcommittee to be available to help with that and also to make sure it's happening.
Yeah. And it's tricky, Brett. We think, go ahead, Jane, sorry.
Well, I think that's really helpful. And just going back to the outline or thinking about what's next, I'd be curious when and if Kelly's available to reflect on this, but in the first plan, we struggled to apply the equity assessment because of the sheer volume of recommendations. And so we did it at different levels, but in some cases at the strategy level, in some cases at the action level. But in this, it feels like we should concretely say something about how we're using the equity questions, rubric, whatever we want to use to evaluate the priority actions as they come up and are considered. And there might even be some time sort of focused around those actions and that particular screening at a council meeting. And then second, I think I can do a better job, and Liz and I can talk about this as we develop templates for counselors for their sections. But I know in the past, we've talked about an equity assessment discussion being part of every chapter. So not at the action level, but transportation, talking to like the considerations around what they heard at the public engagement around what people want, but also around what it means to make to decarbonize the transportation sector in an equitable way, and how that factors into the overall book of work and then the priority actions. So we should do a better job in the template development of considering that. But then I also think that the priority is the wrong word, but like the top tier actions probably need some more detailed dive into what the equity considerations are around those and how they were thought in lifting those up.
I am back. Sorry, folks.
Boys.
As I said, running around today has been hectic. So, yeah, so and basically I think the ask is, you know, we have, especially with our current subcommittee makeup, we have a lot of expertise in you know, trying to make things accessible. And so that includes plain language, also, you know, how to point people towards the, how do we make sure that people understand how to access services that are being proposed, and building in ways to make it, you know, streamline processes for people to get, you know, air source heat pumps or whatever. I'm just using that as an example. So if there are ways that we can more officially help in especially those top line items to review them, to help with drafting plain language, or to make recommendations for adding plain language, things like that are just something that I think our subcommittee could help with and help ease the burden on each individual other subcommittee or the climate council as a whole to try to do all of that. Obviously, every subcommittee in the council should be putting equity considerations in and really thinking about it and listening to the public comment and feedback from our public engagement. But I feel like our subcommittee could do a little bit more to help with that. And so we're talking about this on Thursday, and we wanted to get a temperature, like how do you all feel about maybe pursuing that and coming up with a more official proposal that how we would want to help.
Thanks, Kelly. So how do folks feel about that as well? It sounds like, so from Jane, we're hearing that for the top actions or priorities actions, that top list of actions, probably schedule time in council meetings to really go through some of those questions that are in that guidance. Remember, Just Transitions came out with that really nice guidance document, and there's specific questions there from the rubric that are probably the most relevant ones. So schedule time at council meetings. In every chapter that gets written, the substantive chapter, have a discussion around how equity was woven into that thinking and the implications, right? And now what Kelly's saying is a third thing, which is from a plain language standpoint, there's expertise on the Just Transition Subcommittee to help out. And there could be a moment in time, I'm not sure exactly when that moment in time is, where they're helping with some plain language effort. Reactions, steering committee members, to these items? Sound good? Okay. Kelly, I wonder if we can, because we're sort of up against the clock right now, whether you and Jane and others can think about how to hit that timing best with that plain language support. Like, when is that moment
Yeah, that would be really
or
helpful.
moments?
Yeah, and we can at our next meeting sort of flesh out suggestions of what we think we could do to help, you know, make it more specific and all of that. And then yeah, it'd be good to talk to you know, Jane and Liz about timing. I think that they'd be able to provide more of a sense of when that.
Yeah, I think so. Any last thoughts, steering committee members, on that? Quick check-in. Anything else? Okay. Great. Thanks, Kelly, for bringing that up. The last thing we have are these meeting dates before we do public comment. I'll just flash them on the screen here. There's some logic here, which is prior to every council meeting, having the steering committee weigh in on the agenda and the preparation. That's like a key piece of this. Liz, I think you would put these together as well, Liz Amler. So if there's any other sort of logic or context you want to provide before we approve these, I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that happens.
You're good?
Yep.
Okay. So steering committee members, any reason not to just approve this schedule? Again, we've got 2 council meetings in January. We've got 2 council meetings in March. I think 2 in May as well, as we really get to the final hurrah. Does this look okay? There's a Tuesday in here because of the holiday on the Monday that week. Secretary Moore?
Sorry, I was having a hard time finding the button.
Yeah, it's fine.
I wonder if we could shorten these to an hour each, just in recognition of the fact that we're going to be meeting so frequently, and a lot of what the steering committee is doing is thinking about agenda and sort of process management. I would hope in meeting every other week that we might not need 90 minutes.
Yeah. Liz and Jane?
Just flagging that, we just noticed that, May 26th is Memorial Day, so we're proposing to move that to the 27th, a Tuesday.
Okay.
And I think an hour makes, I thought that myself too. So just ask you all, do you want 8:30 to 9:30 or 9 to 10?
Any preference?
8:30 start time is best.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd prefer the earlier start time too.
Okay. So how about this? We tighten these up to an hour. It gives ourselves an efficiency to get through stuff. And the only change here would be to take it off Memorial Day and make it a Tuesday. Any concerns with this? Besides how it takes your breath away, like it's a lot of meetings? Okay. Thanks, everyone. Okay. I think that's it, unless anything else, and we'll open it up for public comment. Any final things from our conversations yet? Or so far, sorry. Jared?
I just wanted to, I know that there's a lot going on between the speaking on video and the chat, and I didn't say it publicly as part of the meeting, so I just wanted to make sure that something I had put in the chat got captured in the notes and the planning for the drafting, which is around the progress assessment chapter, to the extent that that would be focusing on progress with relation to emissions reduction. I will want to have a hand in crafting that.
Thanks, Jared. Got it. Okay. All right. Well, why don't we pause for public comment if someone's been joining or people have been joining us today and have some thoughts for the things we've been working on as a steering committee. This is an opportunity if folks want to weigh in, if anyone's been joining us today. I'll pause for a moment. In the absence of seeing that, I'll just, Jane and Liz, is that something to finish up? Okay, hang on just a second. Again, folks, if you'd like to, anybody's been joining us and has some comment, now's a good time. Okay, I'm not seeing hands there. Jane and Liz, over to you.
I just wanted to acknowledge that we put this on the agenda, and I'm just gonna raise up what it was and acknowledge that we'll work on this. We flagged on that section of on a previous section of the agenda about the interest in developing a guide for the council for the next 6 months, similar to what Billy had put in the chat and referenced around subcommittee guidance for 6 months, that there was an interest and need to sort of do the same for drafting and development of the plan from here forward. And so that prioritization, that guidance, that timeline, we can do in a singular document for the council too, and look to share that probably at the early January meeting as sort of a acknowledgement of the workflow for the next 6 months.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, sounds great. And you all as a steering committee can review that on January 6th when we meet. Okay. I think that's it. Any final reflections before we sign off today?
Thanks everyone for welcoming me. I can grasp the breadth that I need to come up to speed on, so I appreciate your expertise and dedication to this.
Super. Thank you. Okay. I think that's it, everybody. Happy Monday. May it be a good week.
Thanks.
Take care, everyone.